This documentary made possible by the generous donation of Richard Montgomery Wright.
There's not a day that goes by in my life now where I don't think about Vietnam. I think it was probably 20 or 30-year stretches where I would think of Vietnam, maybe when something came up. But I didn't think about Vietnam on a regular basis, and I think, again, that was a defense mechanism to put it behind me and go on ahead with my life. Now, on the waning years of my life, it's important to me, and I think about it every day. I was hoping I wouldn't have to go. I never had a dog growing up. My dad didn't like them. He liked cats, but there was no such thing as war cats. So, no, I knew nothing about dogs in the service. I didn't know they were even used. We have records all the way back to the Civil War of using dogs. In the Civil War, there was no recruitment by either the Union or the Confederate armies, but these were basically farm dogs that followed their master into war. And we know this of reading diaries written by soldiers, and it talks about, their dog being a messenger dog. They would tie a message onto his collar and send him down to another troop line, and then they'd pull the message off the collar and they would send it back. Yeah, these were pretty well-trained dogs. If they were captured, they weren't going to give secrets away. World War II, England, France, Germany all had like 20,000 dogs apiece. And they probably used them a little bit for security because their hearing and their sense of smell is so much superior to ours. They could tell any enemy movement at night where we can't do that, and we certainly used that to our advantage in World War II and in Vietnam too.
I'd like to give my dog to Uncle Sam.
They were patrol dogs and sentry dogs, primarily. And they used like 40 different breeds of dogs. Yeah, there was a mass recruitment of dogs for the U.S. Military in World War II. We used some 40,000 dogs in World War II, and 35 to 40 different breeds. There wasn't any effort to focus on just a couple of breeds. It was pretty much any dog that anybody offered to the military. The military in all branches of the service in World War II and in Vietnam used dogs people offered.
I'll get along somehow if my country needs him now. I'd like to give my dog to Uncle Sam.
There was a test that was administered to all the dogs. I'm more familiar with Vietnam, so I'll talk about that, but the dogs came through Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, and they were given a very exhaustive physical and mental evaluation, and some 75% of the dogs were sent back to the people that attempted to donate them. If they were accepted, people were given a nominal fee. And I talked to some people that had donated dogs in Vietnam, and they said they didn't do it for the money. They did it for the service of their country. They could have made more money selling them to pet stores or something like that. There was never any attempt to get it back to the person that donated. That was part of the agreement. That was a one-time donation. They weren't going to see it again. Vietnam was a helicopter war. All the transportation of dogs, just like they were infantry, was done by helicopters. They had to become comfortable with the wind and the sound generated from helicopters, and some of them would freak out and they wouldn't use them. The ones that they used, they were fine with helicopters, and even they got excited about helicopters coming in to pick them up, just like the soldiers, because it meant you're getting out of the field and you're going back to the rear. So when a helicopter's coming in, the dog started wagging his tail. He knew what was happening. He knew that helicopter was going to take him out. Vietnam, they focused on two breeds, German Shepherds and Labrador Retrievers. Labrador Retrievers, because their sense of smell is very good. They keep the nose down on the ground, so they're real good on ground sense. German Shepherds, everything else. Scout dogs, sentry dogs, mine and tunnel dogs, water patrol dogs, drug enforcement dogs. That was all German Shepherds. When we went over to Vietnam, we're there for a year. At the end of our year, we're sent back. The dog stays there. So the dog has to be able to adapt to a new handler coming in, and both of those breeds could do that. I got a German Shepherd. I was assigned to the 48th Infantry Platoon Scout Dog and given Big Boy. And that was another break. I'm very fortunate in both the dogs that I worked with, because Big Boy had been there for 4 years, so he knew what he was doing. I was the green one. I was the one that had to be taught. I just had to learn how he alerts on ambushes and booby traps, and that was his job, to lead a patrol and tell us that there's enemy ambush ahead or there's a booby trap ahead, and it was my job to read him and give my best guesstimate of what was ahead. If he smelled a booby trap, in other words, a non-human ambush, a booby trap, he would sit down. And that was just wonderful, because they didn't just string a tripwire across a path. First of all, we usually didn't travel on paths because they did that kind of thing. Sometimes they wouldn't just string one booby trap and one tripwire. They would have multiple ones, and they'd be in a series. And it's possible that the dog could have fortunately woven his way through and missed a couple of traps. And if I call him back to me, he might hit one of these that he missed initially. So as soon as he detects anything at all, whether he hears the vibration of the tripwire in the wind, whether he smells the scent of crushed vegetation of the enemy setting these up, whether he smells the explosive in the grenade or whatever the booby trap is, we also use that in our training to teach him to not go through a wire. As soon as he smells that explosive, he sits down. And then I go up exactly the same steps that he took. I'm not going to shortcut. If he made a little turn, I'm going to make the same turn, because he might have turned for a reason. There might have been something right ahead, and I don't want to hit that either. So I'd get right up with him. He would be sitting down. I'd crouch down behind him, and I'd try to see. I knew it was a mechanical trap as opposed to a human ambush, so I had the time and the luxury of trying to see what he was alerting on. And I would give my best guess. And most of the time I could eventually see one. I could see the wire, or I could see the grenade tied along a tree or something like that, and then we could blow it up. He would respond only to me on my commands, and most of my commands are silent commands, because you don't want to be making verbal commands. You want to be quiet there. So he's not paying attention to anybody else except for me, and I'm locked in on him. Well, we're walking up this river, and he was, probably 20 feet ahead of me. And all of a sudden, he stops. And his muscles tense up, and he's looking upstream. And his nose is up in the air, and I can see him Well, there was a huge boulder up ahead of us in this stream, and people behind it. This was a classic human ambush alert, and the scent of those, and they were Viet Cong. The scent of the Viet Cong behind that rock was just carried right down the river, perfectly for them. And that rock was probably 150 meters ahead of us, and I went up to him, and I'm looking at the wind and everything, and I'm saying, there's a perfect hiding place there. The guy behind me comes right up, he says, what's up there? And I said, I think there's enemy. Maybe behind that rock, I'm not sure, but up in that general area. That's the end of my job. I don't go any further at that point. So what we did, the infantry troops behind me surrounded it from both sides. And indeed, there was about 8 of them behind that boulder, and they opened fire, and I think they killed 6 of them. And there's no doubt in my mind that if a dog hadn't been leading that patrol, we would have never smelled them. We would have got right opposite that boulder and we're standing in a river with no protection at all. I wouldn't be here today, and I don't think anybody in that patrol would be here today. That's an example of what these dogs did. There was not dog teams assigned to every unit. We would only go out with different units if they requested us. You know, they would have a radio man and they would have a machine gunner, but they wouldn't necessarily have a dog. Sometimes when I'd be out with units, there was some opposition to me walking point, because guys would say, look, I've been doing this my whole tour here. I'm real good at it. I don't need a dog doing this. Okay, if they didn't want me to do that, I wouldn't do it. I'd take Big Boy and we'd get toward the back. But a lot of time, most of the time, when I was called out in the field, they wanted a dog to lead that patrol, and that's what we did. He was just wonderful. And not only was he a 4-year veteran and knew what he was doing, if he could survive 4 years, he had to be pretty good. But it was a real advantage to me to have such an experienced dog, and also to have such a friendly dog. I mean, he was big. That's where the name came from. He was a big German Shepherd, very intimidating, but he loved everybody. He didn't have any enemies. He would smell the Viet Cong and the NVA because that was his job, but he had no animosity toward him. And when we're walking around back in our barracks, back in the rear, of course, you got all the South Vietnamese there. You don't want dogs going after them, and we had some dogs that were very aggressive that they couldn't tell the difference between the friendly and the enemy, and how could you expect the dogs to do it? We couldn't do it either, so guys had to be real careful with their dogs when they were back in the rear. I didn't. I wouldn't even have him on a leash. He would just walk along with me because he's not going to go after anybody. But he's intimidating enough that nobody's going to mess with me. A typical field experience, we'd be out in the field from anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks was the longest I was in the field, 21 straight days with him. That was tough because we were about the end of any food that we had, and yeah, we couldn't get resupplied because it was monsoon and the choppers wouldn't fly in the monsoon. So he's with me all the time. And he's sleeping with me, and during the monsoon it's raining all the time, and he didn't like the rain either. So he crawled under the poncho with me with that wet dog smell, and I could care less because I was out there for 3 weeks without showering with the same set of clothes on, so it didn't bother me that he was with me. He was so much different than my rifle. I had no remorse at all when I hung my rifle up the last time, but when I had to watch him get crated up and sent over to South Vietnamese, it just tore me apart. I was losing my buddy who saved my life. It was my constant companion. A lot of the guys, again, that had aggressive dogs, had to be careful with them. They put him back in the kennel. I pretty much kept him with me all the time I was back in rear. He slept at the base of my cot. If I would go into bars or something like that, he'd come in with me and he'd sit down on the floor. He was just with me all the time.
Here I am at Da Nang, better known as Dodge City.
I got to see the Bob Hope show. I happened to be back in the rear when Bob Hope came to Da Nang.
Go any further and you're in Cong country.
And I got back, and the show was that night, and they were giving tickets out, and there was no more tickets. And I said, darn, I can't go to Bob Hope. And my commanding officer there said, you got a dog, that's your ticket. So I took Big Boy up there, and of course they thought we were security, and they let us walk right in, and I had great seats right up front of the Bob Hope shows. We carried two types of dog food. We carried like dried kennels and bits kind of thing in cellophane, and then I carried cans of horse meat, and I would mix it up. And the other soldiers loved the horse meat. They would come up and try to barter with me all the time for the cans of horse meat because that was much more edible than our old sea rations were. I would only do that if I knew I was getting out of the field and getting back to the rear. I would never shortchange Big Boy for any gains that I could make. But yeah, we would open cans of horse meat for them. And most of the time, water was not a problem in Vietnam because it's the tropics and there's lots of rain. But sometimes we were in dry areas, and then I had to carry extra canteens of water. So almost everything I carried on my back was for him, whether it was food. I certainly carried my own ammunition. I didn't carry any fresh clothes for me. I didn't care about that. I didn't carry any pans for the dog. I'd take my helmet off, and I'd mix the food up in the helmet and put it down there. He'd just eat out of my helmet, and then I'd put it back on my head. I'm out 21 straight days, 95 degrees, 95% humidity in the same clothes. You think it's gonna bother me if I let the dog eat out of my helmet and I put the helmet back on my head? No, cleanliness wasn't a big issue back then. We were crossing a small stream. We weren't walking up, we were just crossing it. And he refused to cross it. And it was really a hot day. And he loved water. He's just like a dog here. If it's real hot in the day, they'd love to go lay down in a little stream and cool down. He wouldn't cross that stream. And I had the lieutenant with me at the time. And I tried to send him on through, and he wouldn't cross it. And the lieutenant's getting angry. He's saying, no, just send him across. I said, sir, something's going on here. I said, he usually crosses these very willingly. And I said, I think there might be something up there that's carrying down the stream that's bothering him. And he sent a couple of guys up there, and maybe 25 meters up ahead, there was an unexploded 500-pound bomb that was dropped by a B-52 bomber, ours, unexploded in the stream. And of course, the scent of that explosion was carried down, and he was picking that up, and that made him nervous. And he didn't know exactly where it was. He didn't sit down or anything. He just he was very confused, and he wouldn't cross that. Well, if the enemy finds that, they make hundreds of booby traps out of that. So it was fortunate we found it, and then we blew it in place, and then it's harmless. But yeah, that was on that 21-day mission that he found that. That's our job, and that's really what we had to go through the 6 months training in Fort Gordon and learn how to do that, learn how to read the dog. It's instinct for the dog. Dogs are capable of doing some amazing things that we don't even know about yet. I mean, here we use them for human limitations, for hearing and sight and things like that, and now we're starting to use them for the detection of the growth of cancer cells because their sense of smell is even more acute than machines. The limitations aren't in the dogs, it's in our abilities to understand what the dog is capable of telling us. If he gives me a human ambush alert, I have him stay right where he is. I will go up to him and I will try to figure out where the enemy might be that he's alerted on. And then I tell the guy behind me, and that's the end of my job. Now, I'm not going to just stand up and me and Big Boy are going to walk back to the rear, because a lot of times you're not certain where the enemy is. So you want to, hey, I'm just going to stay low here until we figure out what's going on. But everybody else then goes around me and goes up and tries to see what's up there. We also use these dogs to avoid. I mean, think about this. This is 1972. We know we're leaving soon. Would it really make a lot of sense to have a big firefight and we're gonna maybe risk getting people killed? There was times when I'm walking through and Big Boy gives me a human ambush alert and the guy comes up behind me, he says, "What's up there?" And I said, "There's people." And he'll call back to the lieutenant or the captain and tell him what we found up there. And sometimes they'll say, "Go the other way." And that's fine with us. We weren't looking for glory, we're just looking to survive. So I like to think they saved lives that way as well. It was Christmas Day and we were out in the field. Christmas of 1971, and we were out in the field. And we'd been out in the field for over a week and we were smelly and stinky and we always eat sea rations. Well, Christmas Day, a helicopter was gonna fly out and bring hot food, bring turkey and mashed potatoes and beans and pumpkin pie, and it was gonna be served by women. We were gonna have Red Cross women that would come out and were gonna serve us. And so we're trying to look as presentable as we can, which is difficult to do when you're out there in the same set of clothes. And we're trying to comb our hair, comb the grease in our hair. And we were so excited, and it's pouring rain. And the helicopter came out, but it was so wet, it didn't land. It just hovered on the ground, and we think it was women that pushed the food off the side. Well, then they set it up and they would scoop it on these paper plates, and it's pouring rain and I'm sitting there and I'm trying to eat as fast as I can, and the rain's coming down and the paper plate's starting to collapse, and Big Boy's sitting right next to me and he's just looking at that food, and then all of a sudden that paper plate collapses, the food falls down, and Big Boy scarfs it all up, so he loves it. I remember that, and that's the kind of thing I want to remember with him, some of the happy times that we had there. That's what kind of keeps me going today. I didn't talk about it much except the people that understood, and the only people that understood were the people that were there. And so if I knew somebody was a fellow Vietnam veteran, I would talk to him about it. I saw guys killed. When I first landed in Vietnam, my first experience and exposure to Vietnam was landing in Tan Son Nhut and having the caskets, soldiers that were coming back lined up on the side, ready to be loaded on the plane that just brought us in. And that's a reality check there. Hey, this is war, this is serious. But there's 58,000 names on that wall in Washington, D.C. Most of them very young men that would have loved an opportunity to do what they could with their lives. And here I'm 68 years old, and I've had a long, fruitful, productive, happy life. There's no room for bitterness or resentment, because I've had the chance to live my life and these guys didn't. When I got back from Vietnam, again, that was a very tumultuous time. It was very difficult for me because I had to lead my dog there. I think it would have been a lot easier for my return to the United States if that dog was with me, because he understood what we went through. Agent Orange, of course, was used extensively in Vietnam. They needed a defoliant to eliminate the hiding places of the NVA and the VC. I'm a wildlife biologist, that was my profession. I worked in the pesticide area for the government, for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. There's criteria before a product comes on the market. I think what happened in Vietnam was this Agent Orange, it was such a push to get an effective defoliant that they might have short-circuited some of the safety features. We weren't ever given any kind of briefing on what to do when you're around Agent Orange. The people that really suffered the most were the people that were spraying it, the people that were on the helicopters and things that were spraying Agent Orange. I hear that some of them didn't even have any masks or anything, and the stuff is blowing back in them. It's a carcinogen. It's a cancer-causing agent. I look back on it now and I'm glad I served. And I'm proud of my service. And I wouldn't have said that even 5 years ago. I wear a Vietnam veteran hat now. On my truck, I have Vietnam veteran license plates. I would have never done that 5 years ago. The day I left Vietnam was happy for me because I was going home. But I will carry to my grave that dog looking back at me as he's crated up by South Vietnamese and thrown on a truck and driven away. And I'll never forget that look of abandonment that he gave me. And I still get emotional, and that's 40-some years ago, and it still bothers me to talk about it. I loved him. I cared so much about that dog because he saved my life. He saved my life that time with the enemy behind the rock, for example. But I might have been 23 years old and older than most of them, but I was still scared when I was over there. And he was such a sense of comfort for me and such a companion. I mean, it's just like dogs today, you know. They don't care about anything else except pleasing you. And that's the way he was. And yeah, he didn't care about rank, or he didn't care about pay or anything like that. He just wanted pets, and he was with me all the time.